listening to She Rises, a podcast dedicated to women who are ready to stop settling and start living their lives by design. If you're ready to talk about the stuff that weighs you down and get practical advice on everything from your health, body image, spirituality, relationships, and personal growth, then you're in the right place. Hello, I'm Giovanna Capozza, your host, master coach, spiritual teacher, and mind-body expert, and I'm on a mission to unsettle women all over the world. Are you ready to rise? Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of She Rises. I'm your host, Giovanna Capozza. And today on the show with me is a very special topic. It's a topic that I won't say I was skeptical of in the past. I just didn't really pay too much attention to it. I didn't understand it. I really didn't understand how it applied to me. And frankly, all I knew about astrology was that I was a Gemini, and every now and again I'd read my horoscope, and sometimes it resonated and sometimes it didn't, and I kind of just left it at that. Well, lo and behold, I have an amazing guest on the show today who is an expert astrologer and a coach and a women's advocate. And I'm excited to have her here. For me, several years back, I started to kind of explore a little more about what astrology is. I started to be a little more curious, and I discovered that it was a science. Discovered that there are ways in which we can use that to empower us. There are ways that we can follow as women our lunar cycle and really start to understand ourselves better. In fact, I've been following my lunar cycle for a very, very long time now. And somehow I sort of kept that separate from the rest of astrology. I don't know how I did that, but I did. So I'm excited to have the guest on the show today that we have on. Her name is Jennifer Racioppi. She's the founder of the Lunar Logic Revolution. This is a movement for the modern woman so that she can achieve her dreams in complete alignment with the fullest expression of herself. The Lunar Logic Revolution involves embracing both the spiritual and the scientific, a combination of astrology, intuition, wellness research, and strategic best practices so that we can emerge from a place of wholeness and steadfast resilience in the face of everything that this crazy, magical, fast-paced world has in store for us. Jenn's methodology helps women access their voice, make sense of their emotions, their feminine power, and create a foundation of strength and fortitude as they move towards business success, financial empowerment, thriving relationships, and their most significant life goals. In addition to being a sought-after astrologer, Jennifer is also a Duke Integrative Medicine certified health coach. She's also studied positive psychology under Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar and Dr. Sirois, as well as women's health experts, Sara Gottfried and Jessica Drummond. I hope I didn't butcher those names too much. I'm excited to have Jenn on the show today, again, because of selfish reasons, my own personal search in this area, but also because I know how much it's empowered me to understand my emotional landscape, to understand my flows, and how much I've also seen it affect my clients and friends and family and people that have started to get curious about how to use their cycles as women, emotional and otherwise, to empower themselves and lead their own lives, really. So I'm excited to have Jenn on the show today. I'm excited for you guys to hear the show. As always, if you have benefit from this show, if it really spoke to you, sharing is caring. So I'd love for you to share it with your friends. I also would love for you to join the She Rises Tribe on Facebook. You can search She Rises Tribe. Join the group. That's where the discussion will continue after the show. That's where I'd love to hear from you, what you thought about the show. You can tag myself and Jennifer and continue the conversation there. Just a small little show note, everyone. At about the 30-minute mark, Jenn is talking to us and taking us through the different elements and the air signs. And that's when the audio cuts off. She says the first three elements, and the last element, which is air, the signs associated to that are Gemini, Aquarius, and Libra. So when you get to that part, that's the little piece that you're missing. Enjoy. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of She Rises. I'm so excited to have Jenn Racioppi on the show today. Jenn is a coach, an astrologer, and really a women's health advocate and empowerment advocate. And I'm excited to have her on the show today to talk about this amazing topic of astrology. I was not a non-believer, but I was someone who just didn't really use it. I was someone who was, I knew my astrological sign. I knew that I was a Gemini and I'd read up on it, but I didn't know enough about it. And a couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of living with someone who had studied astrology extensively in Australia, and she was educating me and telling me all kinds of stuff. And I realized this is a science, and it's come into my life in ways that have been supportive to me in the last 2 years. And so, in that time, I've also been following Jenn and her work. And Jenn, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you for being here today.
No, thank you for having me. It's so much fun to get to know you and to be a part of your podcast. So thank you.
Yeah, I like I said, I absolutely love the work that you're doing. Being on your website and having followed you for the last year more extensively, just really seeing that you're a woman after my own heart. I love one of the things I like to say about myself is I can get into the woo-woo, but I'm a nerdy girl. Like I love the science and I like the evidence-based stuff. And I love that you combine the two as well.
Yeah. I really strive to create some sense of balance there. And model it really after integrative care. You know, if we look at the wellness world, integrative medicine isn't just about complementary alternative medicine. It's about taking the best practices of Western medicine and marrying it with complementary alternative care. And I figure if they do that in medicine, why can't we do that in business, right? Look at the best in class practices substantiated by evidence-based and peer-reviewed science, and then marry it with something that's a little bit more alternative, but totally spot on, hence astrology.
Yeah, absolutely. Right on, sister. You know, I'm from an integrative alternative medicine background, and I have the exact same philosophy. Is the marriage of the two, I think, is how it's meant to be. I think sometimes we're at the exclusion of one or the other. It's like either you're, too far this end or too far the other end. But I believe that science can support us, can support, like you said, medicine, our spirituality, and vice versa. So I absolutely love that. You have a phenomenal story. Your story to me is radically inspiring, and I know the audience is going to find it really inspiring. Would you share a little bit of your story and sort of how this all began for you?
Yeah, of course. You know, it's interesting to hear you say that my story is so inspiring, and I appreciate that. Thank you. And my story has also been completely excruciating, to be totally honest. It started with a real dysfunctional relationship to my body and, quite honestly, my gender at an early age. I grew up not necessarily loving being a girl. I had a lot of resistance around, I was just a straight up tomboy, to be totally honest. And when I started menstruating and getting my period as a teenager, it just wasn't really easy. I had a lot of problems. I had a horrific hormonal situation where my period just was never, ever, ever normal. So it would be extremely long, definitely painful, lots of mood swings, just a lot of things happening around that. And that experience didn't help me like my gender anymore. And so was in a dark place growing up. And I had gone to the doctor over and over and over and over and over again to complain about my symptoms and these problems I was having. And was mostly just dismissed, given the birth control pill and told to be, go about my way. I was a normal, healthy girl with very normal hormonal imbalances. And no matter how hard I cried or my body cried to be seen and recognized, it just wasn't understood that there was something more dysfunctional happening in my body until maybe it was about 8 weeks after I graduated high school, maybe not even quite 8 weeks, maybe more like 6 weeks. I was house sitting for a friend. She was in Europe and I was there with her dog, and just out of nowhere, quite honestly, I had the most horrific pain come over my body, and it pulled me off the couch onto the floor and buckled over, and all I could do was crawl to the phone and dial 911 and ask for an ambulance. And later that a few hours later in the emergency room, after they had ruled out absolutely everything, they were just like, well, what is the problem here? They determined that there was a tumor the size of a bowling ball rupturing in my left ovary, and I needed immediate surgery. And that basically opened up the awareness that I wasn't a happy, healthy, normal girl with just normal hormonal imbalances. I received a stage 1 ovarian cancer diagnosis on the heels of that, which was actually then rescinded. It was contested. There was a lot of second opinions happening in a really questionable pathology report, which was very unclear as to what was happening, but it didn't require chemo at the time. And I went under really close surveillance by my doctors. And a year later, it was detected that I had a very aggressive endometrial cancer. So I was 19 and it was the late 90s. Integrative medicine wasn't a thing. There was no blogosphere to go Google natural remedies or anything like that. I really didn't have much support. And I was a teenager. My cure was surgery. It was a radical hysterectomy, which was wonderful because it cured my cancer, but it rendered me infertile and postmenopausal, and there were all sorts of side effects that came out of that I didn't really understand. So my life became a little bit of like a whack-a-mole, where it's like, okay, well, cancer's gone, but now I've got all these other problems like depression, anxiety, extreme menopausal symptoms that I didn't really quite understand what they were. And I had a dark night of the soul, to say the least, which sent me on a journey to find some health. And I moved to California. I grew up on the East Coast, and I moved to California. I actually took a leave of absence from college and went to really just go find some health. And I tried a lot of things, but one of the things that most supported me was starting to tie my life to the phases of the moon. And this was like a, whoa, really? Am I really going to do this? This seems really weird. I don't know about this. There were a lot of reasons not to, but I was in a place where I didn't really have any choice but to try everything that was offered to me. And this was offered to me by a woman who then became a mentor to me. And while it didn't fix all of my problems, not even by a stretch of the imagination, I still required quite a bit of rehabilitative care in the form of therapy, in the form of lots of yoga, meditation, and just a whole spiritual reboot of my life. Timing my life to the phases of the moon opened me up to pure potential and ultimately became the foundation of all my spiritual practice. And that was in 2001. So that's a good solid 16 years ago now. And I can faithfully say that I've been religiously following the phases of the moon since then. And over time, I started tracking, almost like I liken it to someone who might not have the gift of seeing. They learn to read with their fingers through Braille. Well, as a non-cycling woman, I learned to track time through planetary rhythms. And first with the moon and then other planetary rhythms. I could predict things. Oh, this is going to happen then because that's happening. Or, oh, I feel this right now. And, oh, it makes sense that that's happening astrologically. And that became my sense of time. It became my sense of creativity. It helped me understand what I wanted to create in my life. It challenged me to live really intentionally because I wanted to ride the waves of the planetary movements rather than be victimized by them, because I had already felt so victimized by everything else. I was going to get out ahead of this, right? I'd be successful here. But it also taught me how to manifest, and it taught me how to see in the dark, for lack of better words. And it became this tremendous healing that radically revolutionized how I lived, how I showed up, what I thought was possible, what I would dare to do, how I would go about things, and became a life of magic, to be totally honest. Not all magic, like anyone. I still have my really challenging times, and I've been through it since cancer more than once in multiple ways. You know, I always say life isn't about making it super easy. It's about actually just getting stronger to handle whatever it throws at you. I really believe in the core philosophy of resilience. So I'm not going to sit here and say that following the phases of the moon solved all my problems, but it certainly gave me a roadmap to deal with my problems with more skills, to apply skillful means to what I was going through. And beyond that, intentionally create. So it's been super fun. And then I would say in around 2008, I started to take astrology way more seriously. Another mentor came into my life who taught me the real ropes. And so since then, it's been a journey of professional development, unfolding. And now I proudly say this is what I do full time.
I love it. I love it. And as you said, your excruciating story, you know, I was thinking some of the best, most inspiring stories are the ones that start excruciating, right? You know, you went through so much at such a young age when you don't even really know your body yet. You don't even know your hormones. You know, at 20, I didn't really know anything. I just, you know, I'd get my period and it would happen. And, you know, I wasn't following stuff like that necessarily. So at a time where you're still just kind of, you know, reconciling your own body and figuring out what's going on, to have such a such a thing happen is what makes your story, I think, so extraordinary, is that you overcame that and you found a way to work with it. So thank you so much for sharing that. I know that revisiting that might not always, might not always be easy, because it's, even though it was so long ago, it's still a pretty radical thing that happened. I love that you use the analogy of, like, teaching yourself how to see again by following the cycles. For me, it kind of happened in the reverse, in the sense that when I started following my moon cycle, it was because, stuff was happening. And I just by accident, I'm using air quotes, nobody can see them. Just by accident, it was like, oh, I read this thing about what was going on, with the moon cycle at that time. I thought, oh my God, that sort of resonates with how I'm feeling. And I sort of accidentally stumbled upon it. And it was like, I was using it to explain my feelings and what was going on. And it was starting to really make sense to me. And I think the biggest thing that it did for me, and I don't know if you find this with yourself or even with your clients, is it made me feel not like cuckoo. It made me feel like, it was like, oh my God, I'm not losing my mind. Like, there's actually, because we're all interconnected and we are stardust, right? Where everything is connected. And there's this massive movement happening, and I'm sensitive. I've been sensitive since I was a very young child, and I'm a sensitive, and I pick this up, and I'm not crazy. And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that, and what you've seen, with your clients, and sort of the I guess the peace of mind that diving into this work can give you.
Yeah. It's funny you say peace of mind. When I ask people, like, what's the biggest benefit they get of working for me, oftentimes people are like, peace of mind. That's what I get, peace of mind. But beyond that, I think we have to just take into consideration that we are mostly water, and the moon pulls the tides. So if the moon raises the ocean, why wouldn't it be also having an effect on us? And emotions are just energy in motion, right? And so our emotions are impacted by what's going on in the atmosphere, of course, right? And particularly those who are more attuned, particularly those who have strong empathetic, compassionate qualities, intuitive abilities, and are sensitive, the highly sensitive amongst us. I didn't know how highly sensitive I was until I started tracking the phases of the moon. I was like, oh my God, my anxiety is at a 10 at the full moon. But at the new moon, I feel like rock solid awesome. So now I just have to scaffold at the full moon to begin to understand a little bit better how I can work with this rhythm and flow to my benefit. So I would say that what you're saying is very true. And I personally experienced it. Was part of my healing of anxiety, was to be able to predict, okay, I feel very anxious at full moons. They're really hard for me. I need to take care of myself, build that self-care in advance, right? At that time, I wasn't sophisticated. I didn't know, like, oh, the moon in this sign is in this area of my chart, and this moon is actually making these connections to these outer planets and this inner planet. I didn't have the ability to really language astrology at the time. I just knew, okay, full moon intense. Plan for that. And I think that that's really common, that we as women are so sensitive to lunar light anyway, right? Because it's happening, the feminine menstrual cycle and the lunar cycle are exact mirrors of one another. Even if our cycles aren't synced up with the moon, it doesn't really matter. The moon is working on us hormonally all the time. So it's really interesting, because we're all going to have different reactions. My reaction to the full moon might not be someone else's reaction to the full moon, but for all of us to know together collectively that, look, all right, this is the full moon and we can expect things, and we need to investigate what that's going to mean for us personally so that we can map it out, is power. It's an assessment, of how we can work with the rhythms and the tides and the flows of the universe, because everything is cyclical. Everything is cyclical.
That's beautiful. And I want to like just pick out at one, well, it's a big part of what you said, but just to really hone in on this, because I love that you're saying, and what you teach is the working with it, because a lot of times, I think this is what used to steer me away from like astrology in the very early days, was I would hear people sort of being like a victim to it, or almost using it as like, oh, well, this is happening, so it must be because of this. And while that's helpful to explain, my emotions are raging, or maybe there's communications difficulties happening and that's sort of a planetary thing. I would see a lot of that. And I remember not too long ago, I read a book by Tasha Silver called Outrageous Openness. And there's a quote in the book where she talks about a yogi whose name I forget, and I'm probably going to butcher the quote, but I loved the quote because she's an astrologer, and she was talking about how to, rather than be a victim of it, like you just said, how to work with it, but also how to not tie everything to it. So this one yogi basically asked his astrologer, he said, I want you to map out all the days that it would be unfavorable for me to travel and go and do these talks and give it to me. And then she gave it to him, and he planned all of his days around that. And I thought it was hilarious because he wanted to, and he was, he had an astrologer, he was very into astrology, but he almost wanted to prove that, you could work with this and it doesn't have to control you. And I love that you brought that piece into it, and that's what you bring with your work, is that you really help people understand and like you use the word prepare. Like, so I know this is coming and I can prepare. I love that, because then it feels like we're not at the whim of these planetary bodies. We're not just victims of this, being a plastic bottle on the ocean. We could actually work with that. So I wonder if you would speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. I have never read that book by Tasha Silver, but it comes up all the time. So I should check it out. I really respect her and follow her like on Facebook and stuff, but I haven't actually invested in reading that book. I really should. So thank you for that reminder. I think what comes up for me when you say that, to be quite honestly, is like, F that. Like, who wants to be a victim?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh, it's like, no, I believe in being conservative to a certain degree, but I also don't want to live in fear.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to live in fear. My work is really about capacity building. It's about developing our capacity to face life exactly as it is and to rise anyway. It's the definition of resilience. And I learned it by having cancer. And I learned it by having a crazy birth chart. And as someone who's been on a wacky path of healing where the doctors didn't have the answers and the medicine didn't quite cure me, and their cure created all these other problems that nobody wanted to own up to, let alone explain, right? They basically abandoned me after that. They were like, hey, you're good. Bye. No one told me that I had entered menopause, let alone what menopause meant. I had to figure all this out on my own. I felt so deceived.
Oh my gosh, they didn't tell you having a radical hysterectomy would like throw you into menopause at 20?
At 19, no. They told me, they said, obviously you'd never be able to have children. And that was very obvious. And I understood that. But to your point, you were describing, like, I had just gone through puberty. I didn't understand the life cycle of what it meant to be a woman. I didn't even know what menopause was.
Oh my gosh,
yeah,
I have no words.
Yeah, and I don't think, bless my mom's heart. She was in a difficult time in her life then. She's doing much better now. But, there were just there was a lot for me to discover on my own. Let's just leave it that way. And I didn't know. So I had been deceived by my doctors, and my healing became my problem. My cure became my hex. And I had just so much to figure out. Anyway, my birth chart is crazy. It's nuts. Obviously, for anyone who have gone through what I went through, like, it was an interesting birth chart. So I spent a lot of time seeking answers, and I would go to these, like, I learned about moon phases from my Ayurvedic practitioner, who's also a Vedic astrologer, and a tarot card reader who told me about it. These were not normal things for a Catholic girl from New Jersey to be dabbling in. Over life and death matters,
God.
like I was really out on a wing and a prayer searching for my own answers. But because of that, I've seen a lot of really gifted healers in my life. And I've also gone to I've been a seeker. I've had my chart done a gazillion times by a gazillion people. And there's nothing worse than leaving an astrology session saying like, oh my God, they just read my chart on the most victim consciousness that ever was. Like I'm scared. I was actually looking for my next level mentor not that long ago. And I went and I got my chart done by someone who's quite famous and really well respected in the astrology world. I wouldn't say it was like covert. It's not that I didn't tell him I was an astrologer, but I didn't volunteer the information because I really was trying to get a sense of like, oh, is this my mentor? And I didn't want to be sold.
Mm.
And I walked out of there feeling so unseen, so unwitnessed, and so read to the lowest common denominator that I was just like, oh, that's definitely not my mentor. And I'm going to need to like put myself back together again because that really hurt. It really hurt. So my point is this: no matter what the chart says, no matter what the stars are doing, we still have this thing called free will. And it's how we dance. It's how we respond. It's how we conjure our strength and our capacity and our sense of sovereignty and our sense of dignity. And to some degree, even our sense of righteousness on what we will and won't allow in our lives, on how we are going to respond to life circumstances with skillful means, as opposed to feeling like, oh, this is who I am, I'm doomed.
Amen, sister.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So it's about having a roadmap. It's not about having a destination. It's about us answering the call and conjuring our sensitivity and our creativity and our resources so that we can face life exactly as it is, all the retrogrades, all the squares, all the oppositions, all the malefics, and thrive anyway. I've read charts for well over 1,000 people now, and it's always fascinating how some people can come to me with the very best aspects in their natal chart or the most amazing things happening astrologically, and they kind of miss it. Right? It's like nothing's really evolving because they're just a little lackadaisical, maybe not trying, maybe they're just a little too comfortable. I don't know what it is, but it's not like it's very activated or animated in their chart. And then people come to me and I'm like, whoa, they're under like the hardest aspects. But, they just got this huge promotion or they're breaking through this aspect in their life and they're really, really, really thriving. So I see it in my practice that tough aspects in and of themselves are initiation, and they're an initiation. They're a call to the next level of sovereignty in our life. They're a call to the next level of genius awakening within. They're a call to the next spiritual leapfrog moment where we're going to actually find our wings.
I love that example because that just totally speaks to the point that, we're not out of control. We're not just being ruled by these planetary bodies and we have no control. I love that you said that. Like some of your clients have not a great chart or they have some challenges there and they're still thriving. And then the opposite is true. So how do you account for that? Like, what do you think it is that's happening with these people?
Well, our thoughts impact our lives, our actions and our behaviors and our habits dictate our life. So wrap them up in a bubble and that, and that's sometimes more powerful than what's going on in the atmosphere, in the cosmos, or what the moment of our birth was. I also think that trines and, positive aspects sometimes are overrated. Sometimes when things are really, really easy astrologically, there's success for things we don't necessarily want, and so we have to, listen, the bottom line is that we have to know who we are and be who we are, right? That's what it's all about. It's about self-ownership. It's about knowing what we want. It's about being directed, focused, goal-driven, but also allowing and not being too aggressive, too assertive, and arrogant. It's about bending to the flow of the universe and letting the universe guide us, knowing that the inner cosmos, our inner knowing is always directing us, but we're connected to something bigger than us. There's a lot of humility that goes along with this. And we need a certain amount of pressure points in our lives. If we just are all rainbows and trines, we might not have the angst. We might not have the drive to persevere. We might not have the resilience because it's not a muscle we've had to flex necessarily. Versus when there's enough, we don't want to be clobbered with challenge, but when there's enough challenge, there's that little bit of friction. It's like flow states. Mahali Csikszentmihalyi wrote so much on flow states, what we need to be in flow states. And that's that period of expanded awareness where we're really in the zone with our work and our genius is activated. But when you look at what creates flow states, it's like actually we need the right level of challenge to match our skill set. And it's not easy getting into flow states. Oftentimes there's a ramp up getting into flow states that feels like resistance. But the adequate amount of challenge is the most important piece. And so I would just say we need an adequate amount of challenge sometimes. It helps us. It catapults us. And when we lack it, maybe there's just a certain sense of laziness. I don't know. And that's not to say things have to be hard either. Things can I mean, I'm in a time right now in my chart where things are really aligning, and it's just such a gift to be on the receiving end of that. So, I mean, I love it when things just align, please. I love to receive.
Right, you've had enough.
Good with it. I'm all good with it. You know, like I'm just like, yes, let's just make it easy. Bow down to the ease. And I've also just trained myself to show up regardless. I don't know if I've totally answered your question.
Yeah, no, you totally did. I mean, like, pressure makes us grow, right? Pressure makes the diamond. So what I hear in that ultimately is that the words that were coming into my head were kind of nature versus nurture. It's like, well, you could have this chart that has all these challenges and all these things, but then it's up to you how you make your choices and how you go through the world. Even if you have no idea of your astrological chart, ultimately, we're in the driver's seat of our lives if we choose to be. And so, yes, pressure causes us to grow, and it doesn't always need to be difficult. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to pick out for the audience too, because I've heard you say some astrology terminology like trines and stuff like that. And for people that are listening, and even for myself that has no idea what a trine is, I know that it's there and it's a word, but I don't know exactly what it is. Can we do a little bit of like astrology 101? And I know that's almost a ridiculous question because we'd be here for 5 hours, but can you tell us a little bit what is a trine or speak to that a little bit more. Mm-hmm.
Sure. So, astrology is all about mathematical angles, and it's about how the planets are relating to one another. So, there are trines, there are squares, there are conjunctions, there are inconjuncts, there are sextiles. And all of it is like, I could throw out a lot of like numbers right now, but I actually hesitate doing that. I think there's an easier way to think about this, and it's through elements. In astrology, there are 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water, right? And when we think about it, earth is that practicality, it's our body, it's our connection to the planet, it's that groundedness. And there are 3 earth signs: Virgo, Taurus, and Capricorn, right? And then there's water, and water is a little bit more of the emotional world, the intuitive world, the flowing states of the give and the take. And those are Scorpio, Pisces, and Cancer. And then there are fire signs, and fires are creativity and our passion and our get up and go. And those are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. And then there are air signs, which are more the mental signs, the thinking, the writing, the communicating signs. And so in astrology, there are 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water, right? Earth to earth, like if a planet's in Capricorn making a connection to Taurus, that's earth to earth, right? That's like that's a manifestation. That's a gift. That's a trine, right? Or we could look at like fire to water. Fire to water. Water puts out fire, like it's not necessarily easy when that happens, because we're dealing with 2 very different ways of being, needing to reconcile how they're going to cooperate with one another. And then, we're dealing with complementary signs. So when something's in fire and then something's in air, well, air helps fire grow, right? That's a resource. It's a sextile. So, I hesitate giving, because there really isn't a 101 astrology. It's like a little bit more, I don't want to overwhelm your readers, your listeners, sorry. But what I want to say is that the elements are really important, and the degrees at which planets are at in the sky are really important, but they're always in a sign, right? And that sign has an element. And when we just think about it, earth and water helps things grow. That's a resource. That's a sextile together. Earth and earth creates stability. Water and water creates, like, those are complementary things that allow things to manifest and coalesce, versus some elemental combinations that aren't as kind and easy. And it's rectifying different ways that these energies are going to blend that aren't natural, right? And so those are the more challenging aspects, and the easier aspects is when there's a blending or an alignment. Does that make sense?
It totally does. It's actually the way that I started sort of trying to comprehend it for myself, because it is such a science and it is so detailed. When I lived with my friend in Melbourne, and she took me on some of my first few sort of astrology workshops, and just reading about it and her speaking to me about it, it's so complex and it is a science and it's very mathematical. And I can, I always joke I can barely calculate the tip on a bill, so I avoid that part. But understanding the elements is how I was able to see, and even just observationally with the people in my life, and certain signs that I resonate with or work well with. And of course, everybody has lots of different signs in their chart, so it could be different. But it was more using the elements observationally for me that helped me start to understand a little bit of that. So yeah, that was a great way of sort of doing an astrology 101. Thank you.
Yeah. And if you think about it, the other way to really think about this is like new moons happen when the sun and the moon are aligning at the same exact degree in the sky, and that's a conjunction, right? So they're together, they're in one element, they're at the same degree. And then full moons are when they're in opposites, right? So they're in an opposition. So the moon is receiving the light of the sun and reflecting it back to Earth, because they're opposite to one another, and therefore that happens, right? And then, there's a waning moon, there's a waxing moon, and then there's a waning moon. And that is the rhythm of time, but it all starts with them at the same exact degree in the same sky. And then they go through this pattern. So we can see the angles in astrology through the phases of the moon as well, which is why following the phases of the moon is really such a great way to learn astrology. Because if you start with the new moon and then you go into the waxing crescent and then the waxing square and the waxing gibbous and the full and then the waning gibbous and the waning square and the waning crescent, you're going to really understand the angles in astrology really well. So that, the moon is a wonderful way to just step in addition to just understanding, okay, this is a new moon in fire, this is a new moon in water, this is a new moon in earth, this is a new moon in air. And those basics are such a wonderful way to get the breadth and the depth and the complexity of astrology without really needing to learn all the science.
I love that. And I love that you brought it back to the moon, because that was going to be my next question. Most of my audience is women. And how can we, just a few, quick sort of tips or some practical ways that we could start following and aligning our cycle, or following the cycle of the moon with our hormones, whether or not you're menstruating or not?
Yeah.
How can we start doing that?
So, it's such a provocative question, right? Because our bodies are so strong and our hormones are so strong that I almost think it's more important to just understand what's going on with you hormonally first. If you are a ovulating woman and you're still in the menstrual phase of your life and your cycle is regular or irregular, to just get a sense of what that rhythm is. When do you ovulate? When do you bleed? Are you consistent? What do you feel like in the follicular stage, which is the period between your menstruation and your ovulation? What do you feel like in the luteal phase, which is the period of ovulation to your menstruation? And start to get a sense of who you are hormonally and how those hormones are setting you up for certain emotional experiences, right? I would actually start there.
Absolutely. I agree.
And then once you have a sense of that, now let's look at what is going on astrologically, right? How are you feeling at new moons? How are you feeling at full moons? If the new moon is the symbolic, the metaphorical menstrual phase, and the full moon is the symbolic, metaphorical ovulation, are you aligned? Is that a natural fit for you? Or are you cycling reverse or in some other pattern, right? And so first start with your hormones, then look at the phases of the moon, and then see how they're working with one another. Energetically, new moons, no matter what's going on in your hormonal life, they're a time of initiations, they're a time of resetting new energetic patterns for manifestation. And full moons are when things get really big and are magnified, right? Think about the power of the full moon. It's bringing things to culmination. It's at a peak moment. So typically things like full moons are, I think, are a great time to see what is working and what's not working, what's coming into being, and what do we need to release, what's blocking us.
I think of the full moon like a spotlight.
Yes.
It's like, spotlight, there it is.
Yeah, totally. Totally. It's like a big old flashlight on our lives. And if we understand that the moon in astrology represents our subconscious emotional need, and that when we're working with the subconscious emotional needs very intentionally by channeling our hormonal rhythms and our lunar rhythms, that spotlight only gets bigger. And that is the power of this work, right? It's like we can actually start becoming intentional creators of our lives, not by just, I think so often in like the manifestation in the spiritual world, it's like, well, what do you want? Okay, go get that. But there's a big problem with that. It's like we're not really looking at it when we're blocking ourselves. And if there are blocks coming up, it's like, oh, I didn't do it right, or I just didn't keep my thoughts positive enough. But, like we're humans and we're complex and we have psychological backgrounds and historical imprints on us. And so sometimes this stuff is unconscious until we have that spotlight shown on it, right? And so to see it more as sport, as game, which is to say like, oh, I'm wondering what's going to illuminate this full moon that I can actually work consciously with and shed during the waning phase. What's actually stopping me? Rather than seeing it as defeat, like, oh, something's coming up, I failed, right? Or I'm not in a good place. Oh, shit, I'm a hot mess. Mm-hmm. There I am again, just screwing it up, right? It's like, actually, let's just anticipate there being some revelatory moments that are going to make us a little, perhaps, humble. Maybe we don't know as much as we think we do, and that's, in my opinion, a great thing. Right? I think all of us can deal with a little bit more humility and graciousness, and also learning to work with our imperfections with grace and dignity, because we all have them, and perfection's a facade that costs us a lot to try to keep up. And so if we can start to lean into the revelation rather than fear it, how productive can we be to start to really recognize where we are holding ourselves back, or a historical pattern in our life has held us back, or a relationship or dynamic that's coming up through, someone else's mirror back to us is really not serving us, things we need to speak out against, things we need to let go of, places we need to tidy up our lives. So back to the question, how do we as women work with this? I would say really understand the rhythm and flow of your body first and foremost. You won't be the expert on you. And then just get a calendar that tells you when the new and the full moons are. If you don't have one, you can go to my website and download my 2017 moon guide and just go put those dates on your calendar and just start to get curious at new moons. How do you feel? What's coming up for you? Start getting curious at full moons. How do you feel? What's coming up for you? And start to track. Are there patterns? Do you have energetic patterns that are in sync with the phases of the moon? Success is knowing who you are and being who you are. And until we have consciousness around how we're behaving, we're only playing with half the deck. So start to observe and become the expert on you. So you can have a greater sense of predictability. And then once you get the new and the full moons down, there's more layers to it, because you can start working with the waxing quarter and the waxing square. But I think for just beginners, just start to understand the new and the full and how they're impacting you, how you feel, what you need. Are there patterns that you could be really integrating in your health and happiness from a self-care perspective?
That was beautiful. Thank you. What I love about this conversation is to me, this feels like, the ultimate empowerment, like your cycles in life. It's not happening to you. It's happening with you and for you, right? And I love that because it feels really empowering to me personally. Like I've been tracking my hormonal cycle since I believe I was 25 when I went off the birth control pill. I had been on it and then off of it and then on it again. And I went off and my hormones just went nutty. I developed cystic acne. I had all this stuff going on. It took me a lot of work on myself to sort of recover that. And later in my alternative medicine practice, one of my specialties was women's issues and women's challenges. And I would see women coming in, and I would experience this myself as well, where, you get to that part of your cycle and there's emotions coming up, or there's, PMS and there's things happening. And what really started to become illuminated for me, especially with what was happening with me and then seeing it in my clients and my patients, was that a lot of things that are repressed or suppressed, they come up and we in our modern world, we call it PMS. And we say it's normal and it's common, but it's not necessarily normal. And it's a way to start paying attention to that. So I love the way you broke it down, because rather than being a victim of your ebbs and flows and your emotional terrain, to really start to use it to your advantage. And I, because I've been tracking my period and my cycle since I was 25, and then also started tracking the moon, I can see the evolution of that. Like I can see I'll have a couple months where on the dark moon, the new moon, I menstruate, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. I'm with the cycle of the moon, and then it'll shift in the next few months. It might be different. It's like, okay. And I love the way you broke it down, Jennifer, because it is to me a true source of empowerment when you as a woman could understand your personal ebbs and flows and your personal like emotional and hormonal cycle, but then also just the feminine aspect that you coach and speak so much about as well, and relate that to the elements. That was beautiful. I love that you said it that way.
Yeah, I mean, and how cool would it be if I have to really thank Dr. Christiane Northrup, because she's been championing this idea for multiple decades.
Love her.
But how cool, yeah, I mean, right? It's just amazing.
Yeah.
How cool would it be if we, as women, really use that time where things were coming up and not just saying, like, it's PMS, pass me the Midol, or let me anesthetize myself in some way, but rather seeing it as like, oh, my soul is speaking to me. Like, I've got to listen to this. Something's coming through that I need to get on my knees about and be humble to hear. And yeah, it's going to be risky because it might ask me to do something that's going to compromise my sense of safety and security in the world as I currently know it, but ultimately open me up to a far bigger expression of who I am, an expression of joy and laughter and love, and not needing to fear my intuition, but working with it. Now that's some sacred medicine.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And like you said earlier, it's building that, two of my favorite words, capacity and resilience, right? Is how can I better handle my life and the cycles? Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about.
That's amazing. Beautiful. I feel like I could talk to you for another 3 hours. I feel like I have so many questions that I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but this has been definitely illuminating for me. And I know for a lot of the people listening, maybe it's your first time even pondering this or hearing about this. Maybe you've never even considered tracking your menstrual cycle or your hormonal cycle with the moon. And I would invite you to, don't be skeptical if that's coming up for you, and just kind of get curious about it, because, initially I was kind of like, really? And that changed for me big time when I started tracking it, when I started seeing, oh, I have emotional stuff coming up here. Number one, oh, the moon's doing this thing. I'm in this part of my cycle. Oh, okay. I'm not going crazy. I can work with this. And so I'd invite you to be curious. And for those of you that have already been tracking this and, following this, I'd love to hear your feedback when, you get on the page and listen to this. You can post in the comments, and you can tag myself and Jennifer, and just to know what your experience of. I think this is a bigger conversation. Jennifer, I'd love to have you back on the show at some point, because there's so much I think we can cover here and talk about.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's been so great to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to hear some of the comments from the listeners.
Yeah, me too. It's one of my favorite topics is, working with feminine energy and with women, and just having us understand ourselves better. One of the gifts, I think, of our cycle is that it doesn't allow us to really suppress stuff. It comes up. And if we can learn to work with that, I think that's, the ultimate in empowerment, as I said before. So I thank you so much for being on the show. I feel like the time has just completely flown by. And I just really appreciate your wisdom and, everything that you're bringing to the world from all of your experiences. So thank you.
Oh, right back at you. Yeah. And just to piggyback on that last point you made, there's no need to fear the difficult, right?
Yeah.
The difficult will be what it is, and we can apply skillful means and rise in the face of it anyway, and maybe even be better because of it. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
It's all sacred medicine. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I love that. Sacred medicine. It truly, truly is. Guys, you can find out more about Jennifer at her website, jenniferracioppi.com. We're going to have that link in the show notes, along with the rest of the show notes and some information about some of the books and resources we talked about. Again, Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the show today. I know the audience is going to get so much from this, and I can't wait to invite you back on to dive deeper.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in, and keep rising, everyone. For books and resources related to today's episode, make sure you head over to sherisespodcast.com, and I'll see you there. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you tune back in next week when I dive into more juicy topics to help make your life the best it can be. And hey, if you've enjoyed listening to the show and you love it, head on over to iTunes and leave me a rate and review and subscribe there to the show.